Every year, the United States grows 90 million acres of corn, enough to blanket the entire state of Montana. This massive harvest moves from the field into nearly every aisle of the modern grocery store. It's the soda in the cooler, the coating on your aspirin, and the adhesive on postage stamps. By some estimates, 3/4 of the products you see on these shelves contain at least one corn-derived ingredient. Curious, slightly baffled tone. Yet for all its dominance, corn is one of the most helpless plants on the planet. Drop an ear of corn on the ground and nothing happens. The husk traps the seeds tight against the cob. Without a human being to peel it open, separate those kernels, and press them into the dirt, corn simply dies where it falls. It is a crop that literally cannot exist without us. This absolute biological dependency creates a strange reality. The most successful grain in human history is also the most vulnerable. To understand how a plant this dependent took over the globe, you have to go back 9,000 years to a scrubby hillside in the Balsas River Valley of southern Mexico. Hunter-gatherers foraging in this landscape encountered a wild grass called teosinte. If you saw teosinte growing wild today, you would probably walk right past it. It is a sparse, weed-like stalk that produces maybe a dozen tiny rock-hard seeds, each locked inside a stony casing. Compare that to a modern ear of corn, which holds around 800 plump kernels neatly arranged on a thick cob. The physical difference is so extreme that for decades, scientists refused to believe they were related. It took a geneticist named George Beadle to map the DNA. He proved that ancient farmers, acting through observation and patience, tweaked just 5 major genetic regions over thousands of years to turn a roadside weed into a supercrop. Every modification that made the plant more useful to humans also stripped away its natural ability to survive. By engineering a wider cob and a tighter husk, early farmers created a biological trap. Both the plant and the people were now permanently tied to one another for survival. The rise of corn agriculture generated massive calorie surpluses. That abundance allowed populations to grow denser and freed up labor, creating classes of priests, artisans, and soldiers who never had to farm at all. These calories formed the literal foundation of Mesoamerican empires. They fueled the labor needed to build the towering limestone temples at Tikal for the Maya. Later, Aztec farmers perfected the chinampa system, artificial floating gardens that yielded up to 7 harvests a year to feed Tenochtitlan, a capital city of over 200,000 people. As corn seeds traveled northward into the Mississippi River Valley, the calorie surplus enabled a new scale of construction. Around 900 CE, it powered the rise of Cahokia, a city centered around enormous earthen mounds that contained more earth than the Great Pyramid of Giza contains stone. The flexibility of a hunter-gatherer life was traded for the rigid demands of the harvest. Those surplus calories anchored roaming bands to the soil, providing the density needed for pyramids, mathematics, and written language. When European ships arrived in the Americas, they quickly realized the value of this high-yield crop. Within decades, corn seeds were being planted across Spain, Italy, and eventually West Africa and China. The Europeans exported the seeds without the cultural context required to eat them safely. Indigenous farmers always processed their corn with an alkaline substance like lime water, a technique called nixtamalization. This process does more than soften the hull. It changes the chemical structure of the grain so the human body can actually absorb its niacin. By skipping this step and grinding raw kernels directly into meal, Old World farmers unknowingly triggered a nutritional crisis. Entire communities that relied on corn as their primary food source began developing a horrifying disease called pellagra. Characterized by peeling skin lesions, dementia, and eventually death, it devastated peasant populations across Europe and the American South for generations. Stripping this biological technology from its ancient culinary instructions turned an empire-building food source into a deadly epidemic. This graph tracks historical corn yields per acre. For generations, harvests were stuck at about 20 to 30 bushels. But in the 1930s, scientists discovered that crossing 2 genetically uniform, inbred lines produced a phenomenon called hybrid vigor. Yields suddenly shot upward, eventually increasing by roughly 600%. But hybridization comes with a structural catch. If you save the seeds from a hybrid harvest and plant them the next spring, the second generation will be weak, stunted, and wildly inconsistent. This biological trait ended the ancient practice of seed saving. Instead, farmers had to buy new seed every single season from agricultural companies. Men like Henry Wallace, the founder of Pioneer Hybrid, built commercial empires on this captive annual market. That commercial dependency deepened in the 1970s under Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz. He directed farmers to plant fence row to fence row and used federal subsidies to push agriculture into massive, chemical-heavy monocultures, promising the government would cover the gap if market prices fell. The relentless drive for maximum yield moved farming away from an independent biological cycle. It became an industrialized system, dependent on corporate seed inputs and federal bailouts to stay afloat. With the government subsidizing record harvests, the massive volume of 1970s corn created a problem of oversupply. Food scientists solved it by inventing a way to convert cornstarch into an intensely sweet liquid, high fructose corn syrup. In the early 1980s, major beverage corporations switched from cane sugar to high fructose corn syrup. As this cheap sweetener flooded the market, recipes for bread, salad dressing, and canned soup were rewritten to include it, shifting the average American sugar intake toward a corn-based baseline. Because federal subsidies make corn unnaturally cheap, corn-derived sweeteners and fats are often the most affordable calories on the shelf. This abundance tracks with a national surge in obesity and type 2 diabetes, particularly in neighborhoods where a gas station selling cheap corn-based snacks is the only place to buy groceries. The push for maximum yield created a world of abundant, cheap calories, but that surplus carries a heavy toll, fueling a rise in chronic disease that hits hardest in neighborhoods where the cheapest calorie is the only one available. Maintaining this massive production system requires severe ecological trade-offs. To keep yields high, farmers apply synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, roughly 12 million tons of it, to cornfields every year. When it rains, that nitrogen washes off the fields and into the Midwest drainage system. This map shows that nitrogen runoff as it flows down the Mississippi River and empties into the Gulf of Mexico. It triggers enormous algae blooms that consume the oxygen in the water, creating a 7,000 square mile dead zone where marine life simply suffocates. Zooming out to look at the entire corn belt reveals a terrifying genetic fragility. Because modern corn stress. In 1970, a fungal pathogen exploited a single shared genetic trait and destroyed 15% of the entire national harvest in one season. A 9,000-year chain of human decisions stretches from a scrubby hillside in Mesoamerica to the endless rows of the modern Midwest. We engineered a wild grass into a completely dependent organism to build empires, fuel cars, and sweeten our food. But looking at the hundreds of millions of acres it now controls, you have to ask, did we domesticate corn, or did corn use us to conquer the planet? If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden stories behind this everyday object, hit the like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what everyday item we should investigate next.